Hey everyone, I am back with another quick boss guide for Throne and Liberty. This time, it's the alien tentacle monster Shaikal of the Cursed Wasteland. This one's probably one of the most challenging bosses of the 5-man dungeons, since it's just a bit complex to pull off and requires everyone paying attention to the boss mechanics in order to succeed. So let's jump right into this one. First off, you're going to notice the board is divided up into 3 pie slices. These slices, which you probably saw from the dungeon run, stun you and damage you when you touch them. These slices are very important and pretty much make or break beating this boss. They can be taken down temporarily using the spike at the edge of the slice. This will enable everyone in the party to rotate and avoid mechanic, though you will want to be careful as there is no indication where the slice is when it's gone. So if you're caught in its path when it reappears, you are stunned and damaged. If it helps, you can place markers on the pie slices before the fight so you can identify where they are when they are down. You do this by hitting control right click. I believe in action cam, I'm pretty sure it's the same in non-action cam, control right click, and you can place either a personal, party, or guild marker down. Now you're going to want the tank to be in their own pie slice due to the cone attack, which the boss does, that increases damage taken. The DPS can either be together or split into the other two. I would recommend the ranged DPS and the healer always stick to the same pie slice, and if anyone else wants to split on their own, which might be helpful, it's a melee DPS. This way, the healer can reach everyone reasonably. Now, the boss has a few basic attacks which can sometimes push the tank away. These attacks can be mitigated by your defense move if you want to avoid some damage, but these moves will be followed up by a fury attack which will need to be blocked by everyone. This attack can do a tremendous amount of damage, especially if you are affected by the debuff that the boss gives, most likely one-shotting most of the DPS as well as the tank occasionally. So make sure you're paying attention every time the boss does this. After some rounds of these attacks, the boss will pick one player for its primary mechanic. This is indicated by a purple ball above the player's head and the boss stopping to focus on them. Everyone needs to be aware that this mechanic is occurring. The person affected will want to bring the boss's focus to one side of the pie slice they're in and await the boss's animation. During this, the team will want to open the slice of the opposite side the boss is being focused to, because the person who is being focused on is going to have to run across and basically make 1.5 pie slices of distance from where they started. So right when the boss begins the animation to fire, the player is going to want to run the circle for a pie slice and a half, as the spray will last that long. All the players are going to also want to make sure they're not in that cone. If a player is caught in this mechanic, it's pretty much instant death. Now, you'll want to be careful not to stand too far from the boss during this mechanic, as rotating the circle away from the boss will be too slow. The tentacle monster's rotation speed is actually really fast, so the best way to handle this is to be literally next to him while you're rotating. Also, if you're doing this mechanic, feel free to DPS as you move, since your job is not that complicated. All you have to do is basically just move at the appropriate time. Also, a big note I want to make about this move is that certain weapons can actually attempt to jump a pie slice in a pinch. So if your teammates are failing to open a wall or they're simply just dead, you can attempt to make the jump solo, but I wouldn't recommend relying on this depending on your weapon, as it sometimes fails for no particular reason. So try to save it for an emergency, since it's really not necessary. I know with the sword and shield charge, that one goes over the pie slice. The trick here is to be right up next to it, usually walking towards it and hitting the jump at the exact right moment. Even with this all in mind, I have done it properly and still was stunned in the pie slice. So just don't rely on it, but know that it's there. Now, before I go into the complicated double purple spray move, I want to mention one more mechanic that you're going to want to look out for, and that's the red gravity wells. These will be indicated by a red mark above the player's head, and it's preceded by Shaikal screaming something about a party. Son of a partay, I have no idea. I don't speak alien squid, but the affected mark player will want to bring this to the back of the pie slice and drop it there. The moment the red mark goes away, that is where the gravity well will spawn. I would recommend dropping it in the center of the slice in the back to avoid covering the opener spikes as well. Now, another thing I want to note about this is the tank usually doesn't get this mechanic, but I have had several times where it did mark me. I don't know if that's because I lost aggro for a moment or what, but just be aware that it can target anyone, and you'll want to make sure that you're ready to drop that somewhere. Now that we've covered the majority of the boss mechanics, I want to talk about the double spray move that wipes a lot of groups. Sometime around 30% HP, the boss is going to use the purple spray move twice in a row. This is very tricky depending on the two targets it chooses, and oftentimes it chooses the same target twice. This can be handled in one of 4 different ways, I would say. The first one being, after going the full pie slice from the first initial mechanic, someone from the originating side of the spray is going to want to open their slice and then the slice needed for the affected player so that they can bring the spray back the other direction that initially came in. Now, this is going to require some quick thinking from the person on the other side of the arena. Typically, it's the tank, unless the tank is the one affected. So just try and be aware. Once you hit this point, you're going to want to be ready for it before it looks like the boss is about to do the second spray, because that's probably too late. So essentially, past 30%, get ready for the double sprays. If you pull this off correctly, you should be able to get the person to run the spray twice in a row while having enough room to actually put these 2 sprays down, but it can be very tricky, and it does require people paying attention to the boss health as well as where exactly the guy ran, and it's usually dependent on 1 or 2 people that are standing in the right place that need to know this mechanic. So the one, which is probably the right way to do this boss, is probably the most complicated. 2 is the affected player has to time it really well, and after the first spray, they actually step back into the purple acid right before it disappears so that they can continue going the same direction that they went in. But honestly, this might require some cooldowns from the healer because the spray does a lot of damage even after it's on the floor. So you can attempt number 2. I've done it as a tank. I used some mitigation moves. I don't know if everyone would be able to survive this method, but it is definitely one that can work. Number 3 is to dash and ignore one of the close slices and still survive. This one's pretty obvious. After the first spray, if you go to do it again and no one has opened the slice for you, just go for a dash if you have a dash. If you don't, that brings us to step 4, which is letting the affected player just eat the spray, and you lose them and you DPS the boss down before it does it again, because it's going to continue doing double sprays for the remainder of the boss fight. Either way, this mechanic can be a bit of RNG due to who is affected, and if the player that needs to act quickly on the second spray is aware of how this mechanic actually works in order to save the target who's getting double sprayed. If this sounds complicated, it's because it is. It is why the bosses probably run the least of all the bosses. It definitely requires some quick thinking from almost any party member at random, and it's actually one of my favorite bosses for this reason, because so many groups are seeking tanks at the final boss, and it lets me skip the entire dungeon and just get to the looting portion, which is great. But that about sums up this boss. If you have any questions or just looking for some streaming content, I'm a desperate Twitch streamer seeking validation that I make good YouTube videos, so stop by and let me know. Anyways, guys, have a great one, and thank you for watching.